Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, helping higher education marketing leaders share knowledge about learning, strategies, and tactics that are relevant today. See what you can learn today by listening to one of our episodes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast hosted by Concept 3D. If you like our content, please follow and subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple, and Google. My name is Shiro Tori, and I'll be your host today. And I can't wait to talk about re-engineering anti-melt campaigns to maximize yield. And for the topic, we have none other than Kelly Nolin joining us today. She's the Director of Admissions at the University of Montana, which we may be mentioning as as well in short. And Kelly actually joined us on a webinar 2 months ago on freezing the melt. So this is going to be a really great topic, and I'm excited for the conversation. So Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shira. I appreciate the invitation.
Great. And I do ask all my guests this as an icebreaker. Tell me what you love about higher ed.
So I love higher ed because of the purpose that it serves. I think educating people to participate in a democracy is incredibly important work. But specifically working in admissions, I love that we get to help students decide if they want to go to college, where they want to go to college, and helping them find a good fit. I've never had a job before where I felt like I got to make a difference every single day. And I feel like the work that we do really accomplishes that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, let's move on to the topics here for today. Can you tell us just a quick, brief summary of your current role and background? And I know your current role is like somewhat new to you as well.
Sure. I'm currently the Director of Admissions at the University of Montana, and it's a role that I've had for almost a year. Before that, I was in admissions for 14 years at Colorado State University. In terms of my background, I don't think anybody really goes to college thinking that they're going to end up in admissions, and I definitely was one of those people. I graduated from the University of Redlands and joined the military after I graduated. And when I was there, I met my husband who was in the Air Force. And so we'd move every 2 or 3 years. And every time we went to a new base, there was always a college or university near the base. And so it was easy for me to get my foot in the door. And I started out in a temporary part-time position working in continuing education at Old Dominion University. I worked at Thomas Nelson Community College. Eventually, I ended up at the University of Denver, where I was fortunate enough to finish a PhD in higher education administration. I worked at American University in faculty development for 6 years and taught, which I absolutely loved. But then we moved to Fort Collins, Colorado. And it was during the recession, and they weren't doing a lot of hiring, but one of the jobs that was available was an admissions counselor. And I thought it would be fun to talk to students about going to college. And I was fortunate enough to get the job. I was a lot older than your typical admissions counselor when I started. I was 39. But I feel like that helped me because I had a lot of good life experience. I'd finished my education. I had a different perspective, and I could, I felt really well with parents and students alike. So I love my time in Fort Collins, but last year I had the opportunity to accept a position in Montana and move up to Missoula. And since my husband and I enjoy whitewater rafting and hiking and camping, Montana is just a really good fit for us. And I'm excited to be at the university at a time when we're actually on the rise and seeing our numbers improve. So to be here at this time is really a privilege.
That's fantastic. I actually didn't know about your background before CSU or Colorado State, so that's super fascinating, and love that you spent some time in Colorado too, because that's where I'm based out of too. So that's fantastic. Montana is beautiful too, and I know it's growing as a population, as a state, so that's exciting as well. Well, great. Well, let's move on to some of the topics. So, similar to our webinar we had 2 months ago on anti-melt campaigns, I liked your perspective on just like the psychological mindset that's necessary to really maximize yield and decrease melt for a successful first day of class. Can you tell us a little bit more about your approach to decreasing melt?
Sure. So I really believe strongly that you can't wait until the summertime to think about melt. And it actually starts when you are building the funnel. I think that we really need to focus in on finding our right fit students. And that's something that we've done in the past year at the University of Montana. We've used some predictive models within Cora in particular to find students that were at the had the highest likelihood of yielding. So that gives us, at least we hope, a running start with students by building that funnel. We also buy a lot of names early so that we're communicating with students starting their sophomore, junior year. I think building that relationship is one of the mindsets that helps us with yield down the road. So we're focusing in on the students that could actually end up at our institution. I'll say that I think it's also vitally important to have a positive working relationship with the marketing department, because if we don't have good materials that are exciting, interesting, eye-catching, if they don't communicate the proper messages, then it doesn't matter how many names we have in the funnel or what kind of work we do. Like, they're telling the story of the institution for us. And so getting them on board so that we can be responsive to things that come up in the funnel is incredibly important. And then I'll also say that right now, it's super important that we equip our admissions counselors with the proper tools. I think for a lot of teams, I'll just speak for our team. Our team is very new and very young, and they don't have a lot of experience with yield campaigns. And so to expect a new admissions counselor as a new territory manager to just know what they're supposed to do in order to get students to confirm and take the next steps and actually end up on campus, that's unfair. And so we need to make sure that they have the right training. We need to get them tools that help them do that work, whether it's clean data or we use the EAB yield survey this year so that we could narrow down the students that we were working with. I feel like if you can support your counselors in this work, you have a higher likelihood of being successful.
Amazing. And you mentioned some tools there, like the EAB report. Like, are there other tools that have been successful for you in your tenure in the past, whether that's with Montana or with CSU?
I would say in my previous experience at CSU, we had a really robust version of Slate. And so we were able to use the data, we were able to segment communications, we were able to really personalize the messages that were going out to students, which I do think makes a difference, acknowledging students where they are in our process. When I got to the version of Slate that we have here, it's not very good. It was built by somebody without admissions experience. So it doesn't do the things that we need it to do, but we're in the process of getting a new instance. And so we're actually giving our counselors, our visit team, the opportunity to use all the best practices and to ask for the tools that they want in Slate. So this time next year, we will have that robust version of Slate. So I think that's probably one of the primary things. And then we've also done a lot of training for our counselors. So we did a session on yield and how to actually ask students where they are in the process and to be comfortable asking for the business. I mean, nobody likes to say that admissions is sales work, but that's really what it is. And we have to be willing to ask for the student and the family to commit to us because they're going to make a huge investment. So how do we have conversations with students where we become not afraid to say, which schools are you looking at? What's keeping you from choosing the University of Montana? Those types of things. We also did a workshop about the non-consumption market. So the percentage of students that are choosing not to go to college at all is increasing. So how do we talk about our value proposition in a way that makes sense, that makes families feel comfortable making the investment in higher education? So I feel like those things combined have been incredibly helpful.
That's amazing. And going back to your point on, making friends or making close alliances with marketing teams, like, can you give me some practical examples of what you mean there? Like, one I thought of is, like, you mentioned the audience creation by doing research, right? Are you sharing that data with marketing and saying, hey, let's tackle this audience together and see how it performs?
Yes, we're absolutely doing that in a very general way. And I can give you a more specific example. Halfway through our recruitment cycle, we noticed that our applications from male students were trending way below where they've normally been. And so we decided that we needed to do something to target male students a little bit more. So once we knew that that was a problem, we talked with marketing about that. And there was a guy in the marketing department who pulled together a small focus group of male students to ask them, why did you choose the University of Montana? And they said that the reason they came up here was, the things that you would expect: the location, the rivers, the mountains, the hunting, the access to skiing, hunting, all of that. And so those were things that we weren't emphasizing in our marketing materials. So we decided that we would add some more traditionally masculine images. And we don't want to stereotype and just assume like all men like football, because we know that that's not true, and there are lots of women that like football. So we didn't only send to male students. We tried to really just broaden our perspective for who we were communicating to. But we did send everybody a link to our um, we have a video about wild sustenance, which is a hunting class that is conducted here at the university. And it can have a broad appeal because it focuses on the mechanics of hunting, but also the ethics of hunting. And it can have a conservation message. It appeals to a wide spectrum of people. And so we sent that to everybody. And again, I don't want to fall on the stereotyping and saying that just adding some images of men made a difference. But if we're going to say that we're inclusive, we have to be inclusive of everybody. And so that is the line that we've been trying to balance on, appealing to a wide spectrum of students, because ultimately students choose a campus because they find their community. They feel like there's a good fit there. Hopefully they feel comfortable. It's a place that's going to be a home for maybe 4 years. And so being able to talk across a wide spectrum is incredibly important. And our marketing partners were super responsive in that. Also, they were really great when we saw that our numbers of FAFSA filers was down. As you know, this year has been a struggle with the FAFSA and with financial aid. And when we noticed that we hadn't had as many students submit the FAFSA as we had in previous years, our marketing area really stepped up with postcards and emails, and just we really flooded the court, I think, in order to really up our FAFSA submissions. So that's work that we wouldn't be able to do without them.
So I know the FAFSA filings have bounced back for, like, the average has bounced back quite a bit for the whole national average. How have they been at UM?
Mm-hmm. We've also seen some improvement. We're still struggling a little bit with continuing students, but overall that is improving. So it's
Amazing.
positive.
And
Yeah.
to your example with noticing enrollment or admissions were down for your male students, what were the changes like? Is it too early to talk about results?
I think it is too early to talk about results. Anecdotally, our percentage, our gender split in the spring and summer, we're definitely a little bit closer to being equal, but it's too early to tell for the fall for sure. Although our housing office did tell us that they're out of rooms for male students. So I'm going to take that as a positive sign.
That's fascinating. Well, this is great. I know you mentioned a little bit about the tools and how you're restructuring or reutilizing Slate to something a little more robust. But are there other things you're doing in your almost 1 year tenure at UM in re-engineering yield campaigns and anti-melt campaigns?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things that we've done this year is to make it easy for students to say yes to us. So again, along the lines of asking students for their business, in Montana, we're not able to ask for an enrollment deposit. None of the schools here can do that. And so we've always relied on things like the housing deposit or course registrations to kind of get a sense for who's coming. But this year we created a form where students could tell us their plans, tell us that they were coming. And so then we started working those students who told us that they intended to enroll. Um, we've also removed a lot of barriers to enrollment. We found that last year and the couple of years prior, so many of our policies and procedures were getting in the way of students enrolling. So an example of that is students needed to submit their immunization records, but they had registration holds until those records were submitted. And so that meant that a lot of students didn't make the connection, couldn't really see themselves on our campus until after they'd done that step. And a lot of them, the process was difficult. There weren't clear instructions. And so we saw that a lot of students were just falling out of the process at that point. Once we removed the barrier so that there wasn't a registration hold, our registrations have been up significantly. So we suspect that we have more registrations early rather than more registrations, but everything does seem to be heading in the right direction. We've also really focused in on communicating deadlines to students. So every step along the way, we have given them the opportunity to know what the next steps are. At every single juncture. So when it was time for them to apply for housing, we made sure we sent them tons of messages. We have told them about what they needed to do to register for courses. Now that orientation is starting, or the sign up process for the orientation experience, which happens the week before classes start, we've seen significant registration numbers there. We heard this morning that we expect a class of between 1,300 and 1,400 students. And so far, almost 1,100 students have registered for orientation. So, and they got one message and they've had 1 week to sign up. So that feels very positive because we've been telling them all along, look for orientation signups. This is when you can do it. And our students have been taking those steps with us.
Wow, that's fantastic. So yeah, I mean, just I know the final numbers aren't here yet until fall rolls around, but having that early confidence like must mean a lot, right? Because it's probably something you don't usually see. So that's fantastic. In terms of communication channels, have you switched anything up? Is email primary channel? Or I've heard like with deadline stuff. So I've had another guest on, they're testing out text messaging a little bit. And so like the way you write that has to be different, but like it can be more direct, like, hey, your deadline for housing is this day, like period. Here's your link. I'm just curious if you've tried any new communication channels.
Yeah, we definitely text. We have been old school with we sent a yield brochure that was super glossy and pretty, but it had a tear off checklist at the back that had all of the dates in it. And we imagined that, that could end up on a family's refrigerator so that parents and other supporters could hold their students accountable. We followed up with emails. We did text to say that those were, the last days that they could apply for housing or pick a roommate or that kind of thing. One channel that's been super helpful for us is Zeme. We use that as our admitted student community, and it really helps students connect not just to the institution, but to each other. And we do a lot of events in Zeme, whether it's just surveys or last month we did a scavenger hunt where people were posting pictures. It's just another opportunity for them to build those relationships and find the right fit.
That's amazing. And in terms of like launching Zeme, is that owned by your department or is it like a shared responsibility across student affairs as well or other departments?
So it has traditionally been run by our marketing
Interesting.
office.
Okay.
But this year we've tasked our visitor services with creating the regular events that will happen so that we can get them scheduled and communicate about them. So it is a partnership and a shared responsibility.
That's amazing. So what I'm hearing is you're giving students an opportunity to build their own community and get a sense of belonging, like virtually, even before orientation.
Exactly.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm curious. So, what are some of the things that have not worked in the past in terms of with yield day strategies?
Yeah, 7,000 cold calls to students who haven't taken any steps in our direction doesn't work. That's what the university admissions office did last year before I arrived, and it had a real toll. It took a real toll on our admissions counselors. As you can imagine, students who haven't taken any steps towards us weren't always very nice in those phone calls. And it was also super stressful for our counselors who felt a lot of pressure in order to bring in the class. So we knew that that was something that we didn't want to repeat this year. That was one of the reasons why we did the yield survey, so we could focus on the students who still needed help making their decision, who maybe needed
Hmm.
extra information, or who said yes and just needed to know about next steps. I would also say that buying just a sheer large volume of prospect names doesn't work. Like going all the way back to what I said at the beginning about how you start working on yield when you build your funnel. We definitely don't subscribe to just spending tons of money. Like a lot of schools, our budget is limited, and so we have to make sure that our name buys count. So really focusing in on the areas where we're likely to yield students, I think, again, is something that we do. And then I think one thing that happened last year that was not good was our counselors seem to take a lot of the blame for the class not and to be clear, the class was the same size as it was in the previous year. It had one more student than the previous year, but because the
Didn't
goal
grow.
had been set so high and it wasn't a realistic goal, there was a lot of disappointment and frustration. And a lot of that was heaped onto our admissions counselors. So now that I'm here, making sure that my counselors have those right tools, making sure that they're not under the spotlight, because ultimately it's my responsibility, it's our vice president's responsibility to make sure that they're equipped in the way that they need in order to be successful. Our admissions counselors work so hard, and so I see it as my responsibility to make sure that they feel valued and supported, because otherwise we see high turnover and that has all kinds of implications. So those types of things, making sure that our counselors are doing very specific work with a clear purpose and
Hmm.
expectation is important. And I think ultimately celebrating our victories where we see them is very important. So every time I see that we've met one of our intermediate goals, like I'll put it out there on our teams, or we'll celebrate it in a meeting. Because the other thing that I always want our counselors to remember is that even though we watch the numbers constantly, each of those numbers is a student and a family who's making a decision that's going to change their life. And how often do you get to participate in that process? So just keeping in mind that students and families are stressed. And even though our numbers are important, ultimately making sure that those students feel cared for and respected and make the decision that's right for them. If we do that, then we're successful, even if our numbers don't quite hit our goals that we've set.
Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing all that. I mean, you mentioned at the start of the call, like your team is, pretty new in terms of in their career, and so I imagine like efforts like that, setting goals that from the start aren't achievable, do risk like turnover and churn, and so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we actually set 3 goals this year. We had an aspirational goal, a middle goal, which is where we want to where we really want to be, and then like a drop dead goal, which is just one more than we had last year.
Awesome. Well, it's been great having you on the show today. I'm wondering where our listeners can follow up with you to understand the good work you're doing.
Sure. So they can find me on the University of Montana's website, which is just umontana.edu.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining, and thanks for our listeners for tuning in today. Catch us on the next one.
Thanks.